everyone, welcome to Wake the Future. Today we are going to be talking about storytelling. Now, storytelling is a core part of agency, and as you know, we have broken AI into its two critical human-centric components, agency plus identity.
Here are three key things that we're going to cover in today's episode.
We are going to cover why storytelling is such a critical piece to our future and how the long-lost art of storytelling is making a huge resurgence.
And we're going to talk about how storytelling right now is, as much as ever, a reflection of the cultural zeitgeist and all of the technological change that's happening and the need for us to have shared cultural touch points.
And the last thing we're going to cover is why storytelling is such a powerful medium for the youngest of generations, why it matters to your kids, and how this is going to be a critical skill set for them going into the future. You could argue that storytelling and the ability for humans to tell stories is as old as not just culture itself, but goes back to the earliest of humans. Way before writing, storytelling was such a powerful medium. So I want to dig into what storytelling is going to mean, why it is so critical now. The number one job outside of anything technical in a lot of companies is storytelling, right? And a lot of companies and brands have tried to sell a narrative and tried to have people internally become storytellers. But I think it's an interesting inflection point where there's been a spotlight on the art of storytelling because it is in direct response to everything that we see happening with AI, the creation of all of this AI slop, that now it is ushering in the necessity for really human-centric stories.
Storytelling is in many ways, it's an art, it's a lost art.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be a refocus on storytelling as a skill, as something which we need to cultivate again, as something which makes us uniquely human. And you open this up today by talking about A plus I, and so many things we talk about are now going to be within this frame of agency and identity as two core pieces of being human in a technological future. I think this episode is really less about us as futurists. It's more about us as anthropologists. That's really what this is about. It's about rediscovering something which I think was core to the human experience a long, long time ago. And as we gain so much with all of these innovations that are out there, all of these technologies, we have to make sure at the same time we don't lose things that are uniquely human. So this is almost like a reclamation of sorts.
Before the written word and before the term fireside chat became co-opted to even mean something else, the value of the storyteller, the man or woman who would be the one to communicate the wisdom of that culture, whether it was derived from relationships to nature, the stars, right? It was a way to really translate what mattered. And then those stories were told generation after generation after generation after generation, and they perpetuated. And I think that the link of that sequence has increasingly been broken, right? What are the stories that we're telling? What are the stories that our children are learning? I think that we can really talk about the technological intermediary of this, basically the nerdy way of saying it's okay, great, well, AI can come in now and not be that shaman or that elevated role of the storyteller sitting around the fire. Can AI come in and do that? And I think you can argue both sides of the coin. Now, I will say that when we really think of the things that make us uniquely human, the power of memory, the power of lived experience, the power of shared narratives, right? All of the things that make us us, our childhoods, our friendships, our communities, all of those things inform such a nuanced kind of fabric of who we are. And then who we are is in the communication of those stories. Can AI replicate that?
I don't think AI can replicate that. And I think about storytelling as two fundamental pieces. It's the transmission of the story and it's the receipt of the story. I mean, for a story to be told between two people, to simplify it, me and you, one person tells the story, the other receives it. And then what you do with that story is really up to you. Now, you can internalize it, or in the future, you could tell that story as I told it, or you can create your own kind of variation of it to tell someone else. And so there is this kind of chain that forms, and it can be a very long chain. We're going to have another episode which talks about the fact that algorithms in the technological world might be pushing people into sameness as far as the information and the stories and the content that they consume.
Yes.
The algorithm is kind of driving people that way. So this is really more focused on the transmission, the telling of stories. And you talk about this kind of cliche, but it's so true, of like the elder sitting around a fire and sharing a story, and we might think of it as like a shaman or whatever, but ultimately people always fill that kind of role.
Mm-hmm.
And it's part of a family's heritage, it's part of a cultural heritage, it's part of something shared. If that fractures, if that's part of this huge cultural evolution we're going through right now, then I think something very, very fundamental changes. And you could argue again, there are two sides to everything. So on the one hand, do we lose something fundamental if we start outsourcing storytelling to technology? You know, you and I have talked offline about the fact that we have friends who have used AI to develop stories that they tell their children. And I think a lot of people think that's a really cool capability of AI. I think about this as you're starting to already compromise that intersection, that human touch point that you might have with your child. So I think that there is definitely a very clear argument to be made that we have to be very cautious about that. On the other hand, you can say that with technology as it exists today, if there is a story about something that is about reality, or a perception of reality, that once that story is now recorded in any technological medium, then in theory that story has a permanence. Whereas if a story is dependent on one person telling another, what does that affect? It's like a game that people play.
It's the telephone game.
The telephone game. You say something to someone, they say something to someone else, and by the time it gets to the last person, it's not even close.
Gibberish. Yeah.
So conventional storytelling, I think, has a component of that, and there's a little bit of magic to that. But at the same time, it's like, is the story now what it was intended in the beginning? Now, because of technology and these platforms, theoretically, you can record a story and it's there in perpetuity. So there's something good to be said about that, but it's still losing some of that human magic.
So I love thinking about this through the lens of sparking magic, right? Because those are those moments that unite. Those are those moments that inspire curiosity and wonder and a sense of awe. All those things that are never going to be replicated by AI. And have we lost, culturally, some of that magic? I was reading an article recently saying the last 5 decades, so starting from about the 1970s through now, pop music, has become darker, sadder, and filled with more hopeless lyrics. I was reading something similar about kind of the bifurcation of movies. On one end, you have all of these art house films. The whole point of it is to evoke all of these deep human emotions. They're heavy. Sometimes I don't want that. I want escapism. I want a departure from all of the shit we see on the news. And I don't always want to go see those movies in like an art house theater. They're all of the ones that are nominated for the Oscars. Fine, whatever you think of them. Then on the other end of the spectrum is like kind of mass Kool-Aid. All of the Fast and Furious franchises, all of the superhero movies, where I can't even name them because that is so not my genre.
Well, it's the Marvel Universe, it's Jason Bourne, it's John Wick.
Yes, I don't know what any of this is.
All of that.
But there's nothing in the middle. It used to be that there were movies and stories that whether you were in any part of the country, of any demographic, of any background, everybody saw that movie.
It was like a cultural touchstone.
Yes. Now, it's like a lot of Hollywood, too, is in more dystopian storytelling. It's a lot of the post-apocalyptic films.
Yeah.
Sci-fi has gotten darker. The drum that I have been beating for so long, and I end my book, AI and the New Human Frontier, on this very note, is it incumbent upon all of us? We always say, will the future require us to ask the questions that matter? Will the future simultaneously require us to tell the types of stories that matter? And is that going to be of even like utmost importance for generations of young people who feel lost, who feel confused, desperate and hopeless over where their personal future is going? Joblessness, mental health, all of that. Like, what is there to inspire them? Are we actually skilled at telling those stories anymore? Is this a lost art?
Wow, you're really cooking right now. What we were talking about before is really all about the mechanics of storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
What you're hitting on here is really the theme, the tone of storytelling, and the fact that storytelling at a cultural level is a perfect reflection at any point in time of the cultural zeitgeist and of what
Yeah,
people are
it's a
thinking
litmus
about.
test. Yeah.
You can go back in history and you can look at the stories that were made. When you're talking about pop culture, media, entertainment, whether it's music, whether it's film, whether it's anything else that's consumed now,
It
streaming,
construes meaning. It communicates meaning.
it encapsulates what's going on at the time. It's basically, so we were talking before about being anthropologists in this episode. We're also kind of mass psychologists. I mean, again, half of the things that we talk about, I reference back to the era of my childhood, which is the 1980s.
Yeah.
And I love the 80s, and anyone who knows me knows how nostalgic I am for that time. The 80s were a powerful decade, and they're not unique in this way, because there was so much in pop culture and in entertainment and the storytelling that reflected the time. Very powerfully, perhaps more so than things that came immediately before it and after. It was, everyone views it as cheesy, as you can picture it, you can almost taste the 80s, like the syrupiness of what was going on there. Everything was either directly related to angst around the Cold War. So there were a lot of dystopian tales of the Cold War. But then counter to that was that there were all of these things that were basically escapism with these bubblegum endings.
Mall culture.
So that people, mall culture, cheesy music, and there was also exploding capitalism. So you had an era that was defined by prosperity but concern. It defined a generation. It defined Gen X and maybe early millennials. If you fast forward to today, it's not an accident that you're seeing darkness and dystopian themes in a lot of pop culture. Now,
Well, and you hit
what does
on
this
something
mean?
important, which is the power of nostalgia.
Yeah.
Right? These things don't happen by accident. It should come as no surprise why a lot of Gen Z is starting to explore a lot of the TV shows from our past. I think a craving for something that anchors them,
Yes.
us, in the past. I do it too. We do it too. You talk about your love of the 80s. We're only 2 years apart, but we exist kind of in like two separate decades, because you know the 90s is very much my jam. I have been very overwhelmed recently by the stories of what I would just call like geopolitical shit. We can't get a straight answer as to what is happening with the war. The world feels like it is imploding. So what have I been doing at night? I have been watching old episodes of Beverly Hills 90210, which I grew up with, the Brenda years. And it just feels good. It's like 40 minutes of just, all right, this story puts me in a happy place. And we are all finding those stories that soothe us, whatever it is, because those stories are our anchor when things become more turbulent. And I would argue that as we move into more of this wisdom-based world, we've talked before about how little parts of the base of the knowledge economy are starting to chip away. What do we hold on to? What is our life raft? And I would say that stories are one of our life rafts. As we go from the knowledge economy as we have traditionally known it, right, for decades, what comes next? And as we move into more wisdom-based types of work, as we tap deeper into redefining our own sense of agency, as we think about who we are does not equal what we produce, our sense of identity, will those two things become our core anchors? In a time when wisdom, will we see the elevation again in the next, right? You talk about the birth canal as we come out the other end of this birth canal, or we just continue to be funneled from one into the next. Will the power of the story and the storyteller themselves be re-elevated at the same time that it was an elevated position in the ancient world? Will it be an elevated position and medium in this, what I would kind of call new world, this like kind of post-AI world? And I would say yes. My argument is that yes, that will be elevated. It is no accident that companies are starting to say, all right, yeah, we do need to sell our brand story differently. We do need to tap into human connection. I think there's another piece of this. And I think a lot of it comes down to trust. Trust is eroding. Trust, whether it's human trust, human to technological trust, right? We are in a trust vacuum. We have talked before about how trust and truth together are decaying faster than ever before. I think stories and connecting to stories as a way to unite people to other people is a powerful way to restore trust.
I love everything you just said. Again, very powerful stuff. No, you're welcome, Eric. I think that we have to think about this a little bit more concretely also. So when we talk about the trusted storyteller, in a family, that can be the matriarch, the patriarch, everyone can be a storyteller in a family. When you're talking about it more broadly, like in a company or in a society,
it's different.
But it's interesting, we have to have this conversation. Everything's becoming more highly centralized. In government, in companies, you have these figureheads. Now, the interesting dichotomy here is that as things become more authoritative, and you have these people that are associated with entire industries, these billionaires, these authoritative political figures, you could argue that in some cases, that line between power and charisma is still holding. In other cases, I think it's an inversely proportional relationship, meaning that power, certainly in the corporate world today, does not equal charisma. It used to be that if you wanted to ascend and run a company and be the corporate storyteller, be the CEO, be the head of the business, you had to have a gravitas and a charisma that was sort of part of the reason you made it that far.
Are you telling me like Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Sam Altman,
So
they're not charismatic?
There we go. Thank you. Exhibits A, B, C, and we could go down the list. And it's basically like, it's an all-star game of people who are very, very brilliant and have founded earth-changing businesses, but, negative charisma. And in some cases, very poor communication skills. So when you're talking about storytelling coming out of people like that, especially if they're the connective tissue, if they're the ones who have the audience, the reach, and the cachet, that millions or billions of people recognize them, but the stories coming out of those people are disjointed, or, and to be kind, you end up with something that's very interesting. So I think a philosophical conversation to have, there's no answer to this, is as things become more centralized and as we have these figures propped up that are either extremely wealthy or extremely powerful, are they going to be in many ways the curators? Are they going to be the storytellers for everyone? But I think that the skills that historically were kind of part of being that elder, being that shaman, don't necessarily hold in that kind of environment anymore today. So that's a very interesting way for us to think about it. Now I want to bring this back into the home, because everything we talk about here at Wake the Future is all about what is this going to mean for people watching this, for themselves.
I'm glad I was just going to say, Vulcan mind meld.
Well, right, exactly. So I think there are a couple of things here. Number one, I'm a firm believer in human storytelling. I understand technology can be an aid. Technology can be a tool. It can be an enhancer. But I think human storytelling is still really critical, especially if you're transmitting messages, for example, between parent and child. Number two, I think that it is really fundamental to instill an appreciation of and an ability in children as they embark on this crazy world we're talking about, to, as they receive stories, to be able to cultivate their own stories and to one day be able to transmit those in a very human way. And I don't want to just pay lip service to that. I don't want to take for granted that will happen, because everything happening with the algorithmic society and what's happening with the rewiring of children's brains suggests that it is not a given that they are going to be able to perpetuate that kind of storytelling dynamic. So I think to the extent that we can be aware of this, we can be intentional, we can be purposeful, and we can instill that kind of skill in our children so that they're aware of the value of storytelling. I think that's also really important.
Yes, because we hear so much about how communication is going to be one of the biggest skill sets, and perhaps it's the next iteration of communication, which is storytelling. Now, I want to go back to something you said, because it made me think of this. I read this years ago, back when our son was really little, that the nature of storytelling had changed dramatically over just even one generation. That the stories that we used to hear as children, whether it was like a choose your own adventure, it was a little bit more open-ended. Now it's character-driven, and it is attached to a brand. So, like Daniel Tiger is a brand. Disney characters are brands. These movies have very singular narrative arcs because like they are pre-written. There's no imagination to it. When the child then gets the toy, you used to imagine that like you would get a little superhero figure, a little whatever, a Barbie doll, and you could create whatever story for that Barbie doll you wanted. I was really into like these little bear stuffies, And I would sit there as a child for hours imagining different worlds, different scenarios. Now characters come with a pre-written story. The stories themselves are almost limiting imagination, and that changed very, very quickly. It's less choose your own adventure now, and it's pre-scripted. Then you add on top of it the fact that a lot of children are not playing with physical toys now. Play is happening with the screen as an intermediary, that they are watching other kids play with toys, or they are watching other kids open boxes. Increasingly, kids are, through a screen, watching other kids maybe tell a story or live out a certain scenario.
Or play a video game. It's a very second-hand experience.
Yes, so that is having a huge impact on how they think, their cognition, their ability and their capacity for imagination. So that is why it is not just the communication of the story itself, it's how the story acts as a medium and a vehicle for all of these other things.
Well, and the generation of stories in one's own mind is a critical developmental, I think, milestone and skill for children. To your point, a lot of children's experience now, unfortunately, because of the interface with technology, has become secondhand. So it's almost like secondhand creative experiences or secondhand storytelling. Not everything is black or white. So we're talking about the branding of characters. That was going on in our lifetimes. I mean, all the toys I had when I was a kid, Star Wars figures, He-Man figures, I mean, it was all attached to properties that were licensed, that were branded. So the fact of the matter is that the branding and licensing of characters in and of themselves did not lead to the deterioration of imagination. What led to the deterioration of imagination, or at least the creation of new stories, I think was the fact that so much media and content started to come out around certain characters that it became almost overwhelming. It used to be that, a character was associated with one movie or the TV show, and then ultimately, like, everything else was unstructured. You still had a lot of room to play in the sandbox. Now it's very different. The best example of this is when you watch a child play with Legos. I mean, I've always said this. You still have basically two options with Legos. You have unstructured Legos where you have a Lego set and you build. And that's what our son likes to do. And I'm so grateful for that. Then there's the other, which is not it's neither better nor worse, it's different, which is focusing in on having the dexterity, the concentration, and the ability to build something with predetermined instructions. And if you make one mistake, it's not going to come out the way it's supposed to. The latter is important, particularly now, because it gets kids to focus. Potentially with their parents for extended periods of time.
Not this parent, I can never follow those Lego instructions.
A lot of people we know do
it.
It gets stuck in your nails. I guess this is what happens.
But the pieces are so small.
The thing about those Lego sets, they promote attention, they promote focus, they promote sticking with a goal, and ultimately those are all really important. In a world where there's fleeting attention spans, for someone to lock in for an hour or many hours by themselves or with their parent, and be able to put something together, there's a real sense of accomplishment there. So that is really critical. On the other hand, what you're basically doing is you're telling someone to operate according to instructions or a program. That is no different than where technology is going and where advanced AI is going. Whereas unstructured Legos lead someone to basically build directly from their imagination. There's no better framework for me to understand the fact that you can either try to constrain the creativity to where the story has already been told, or you can give someone room to play so they can create their own story. That's something that is important for adults, it's important for children. And look, we have another episode about play. And we think about play as a uniquely childlike type of concept. We know from research over decades that play is just as important a thing for grown-ups.
You know my favorite quote, I quote it all the time, I say it almost every single time I'm on stage. And it's such an old quote. It's George Bernard Shaw, the old playwright. And it's, we don't stop playing because we grow old because we stop playing.
Yeah.
And I love it so much because it informs everything. Play has been coached out of us. Those stories have almost been coached out of us. Right? The two do go hand in hand. That's a great framing when you talk about the fact that, yes, of course we did. We had characters, we had all of this. But it's different. It's different now. And then the piece about Lego.
So here are 3 key takeaways from today's episode.
The first is that storytelling is a critical piece of human agency. It gives us a sense of control, meaning, and shared experience.
The other key component of storytelling, which we have to be very mindful of right now, is the fact that storytelling really is a reflection of the cultural zeitgeist and the time in which it is told. And so we have to make sure that we preserve the ability for people to have cultural touchstones.
And the third is that storytelling is a skill that we need to learn, that we need to harness, and that we need to cultivate not only in ourselves, but in our children and the youngest of generations. So thank you for joining today's episode of Wake the Future. As always, make sure to like, follow, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time for more.
If you enjoyed today's conversation, like, follow, and subscribe to stay ahead of what's next. I'm Erica Orange.
And I'm Jared Weiner. Thanks for waking the future with us. We'll see you next time.